I want to talk about something that most companies think they're good at, but actually aren't: strategy. Because if you're being honest, a lot of corporate strategy today is just well designed PowerPoint slides, 5 year plans, market projections, growth assumptions. All of it looks great until reality shows up. And in 2026, reality is moving faster than strategy ever has. So the real question is, what does corporate strategy actually look like now? Because it's not what we were taught. If you're still building strategy like a fixed plan, you're not building strategy. You're building assumptions. And in today's environment, assumptions expire faster than execution. Hi, I'm Neha, and welcome to Corporate Penthouse, where we break down strategy, deals, and growth the way it actually works in the real world. Let me start with a direct observation. Most organizations are not struggling because they lack strategy. They're struggling because their definition of strategy is outdated. They still treat strategy as a structured, periodic exercise, something that is created, documented, approved, and then executed. That model worked in relatively stable environments. It does not work anymore. Because in 2026, the environment is not just dynamic, it is continuously shifting at multiple levels. And that changes the role of strategy entirely. Let's begin with the first fundamental shift. Strategy is no longer periodic, it is continuous. Traditionally, organizations would spend 3 to 4 months building an annual strategy. Market analysis, financial projections, resource allocation, everything would be locked in. Now consider what actually happens in most industries today. Take the consumer goods industry. A company launches a new product variant based on last year's consumer insights. Within 3 months, customer preferences shift, driven by social media trends, pricing sensitivity, or competitor discounts. By the time the company reacts, inventory is already built, distribution is already committed, and marketing spend is already allocated. The issue here is not poor strategy. The issue is strategic rigidity, the inability to adjust decisions fast enough. That is why leading organizations are moving toward continuous strategy systems. They are building mechanisms where strategy is revisited frequently, not annually, not even quarterly in some cases. Monthly performance signals, weekly operational insights, and most importantly, a willingness to change direction without treating it as failure. Because in a dynamic environment, changing direction is not a weakness, it is a requirement. The second shift is the integration of intelligence into decision making. And this is where most discussions around AI remain superficial. AI is not just improving efficiency, it is altering how decisions are made. Let's take an example from the retail industry. Earlier, pricing decisions were made based on historical data, competitor benchmarks, and margin targets. Today, pricing is increasingly dynamic. Algorithms adjust prices based on demand patterns, inventory levels, competitor moves, and even time of day. Now think about the strategic implication. Pricing is no longer a fixed lever. It becomes a continuously optimized variable, which means strategy itself becomes fluid. Another example, logistics and supply chain. Earlier, network planning was done annually. Warehousing decisions, routing decisions, capacity planning, all relatively fixed. Today, companies are using real-time data to dynamically reroute shipments, adjust capacity, and optimize delivery timelines. So what used to be operational decisions are now influencing strategic positioning. Faster delivery becomes a competitive advantage, not because of infrastructure alone, but because of decision intelligence. The implication is clear. Strategy is no longer just about what decisions you make. It is about how those decisions are made and how quickly they evolve. The third shift is in how competitive advantage is built. There is still a tendency to equate advantage with size. Larger organizations assume they are inherently better positioned. But what we are seeing across industries suggests otherwise. Let's take the fintech space. A smaller player enters the market with a focused offering. Faster onboarding, better user experience, fewer friction points. A larger incumbent has more capital, more customers, more infrastructure. But decision-making is slower. Approvals take longer. Changes require alignment across multiple layers. The smaller player iterates weekly. The larger player updates quarterly. Over time, the smaller player builds a stronger user base, not because it had more resources, but because it moved faster. This is the shift. Competitive advantage is no longer defined primarily by resources. It is defined by speed of learning and speed of execution. Which raises an uncomfortable question for many organizations. Not do we have the right strategy, but are we capable of executing this strategy faster than our competitors? Because if the answer is no, the quality of the strategy becomes irrelevant. The fourth shift is the repositioning of the customer within strategy. Earlier, customer input was structured and delayed. Surveys, focus groups, post-launch feedback. Now, customer behavior is visible in real time. Let's take the digital product space. A company launches a new feature. Within hours, they can see adoption rates, drop-off points, time spent, conversion impact. If users are not engaging, that is immediate strategic feedback. Now compare this to the traditional model. Earlier, it could take months to gather meaningful insights. Today, the feedback loop is almost instantaneous, which means strategy can and should evolve accordingly. But this requires a shift in mindset. Strategy is no longer something you validate after execution. It is something you continuously refine during execution. Organizations that fail to integrate real-time customer signals will continue to operate on outdated assumptions. Now let's address what is often the weakest link: execution capability. There is a tendency to believe that once strategy is defined, execution will follow. In reality, execution is where most strategies break down. Let's consider the manufacturing sector. A company identifies an opportunity to move into a higher margin product segment. The strategy is sound, but execution requires reconfiguring production lines, reskilling workforce, realigning supply chains, adjusting sales strategy. If these changes take too long, the window of opportunity closes. Competitors move in, market conditions shift, and the strategy, while correct in principle, fails in practice. This is why execution cannot be treated as a downstream activity. Execution capability, speed, alignment, adaptability must be built into the strategy itself. In many cases, the constraint is not strategic thinking. It is organizational inertia. The next shift is toward portfolio-based strategy. Given the level of uncertainty, placing a few large bets is increasingly risky. Instead, organizations are distributing risk. Let's take an example from the energy sector. A company is navigating the transition from traditional energy sources to renewables. Instead of committing entirely to one pathway, they invest across multiple areas: solar projects, wind energy, energy storage, grid optimization technologies. Some of these bets will underperform, some will scale. But the portfolio approach allows the organization to adapt as the market evolves. This is a more resilient model, because it acknowledges uncertainty instead of attempting to eliminate it. Finally, leadership. This is where the most significant mindset shift is required. The traditional expectation is that leaders provide clarity and direction. But in complex environments, clarity is often temporary. What matters more is the ability to navigate ambiguity. Let's take a scenario from the healthcare industry. A company is dealing with regulatory changes, technological innovation, and shifting patient expectations. There is no single correct strategic path. What leadership needs to do is continuously interpret external signals, align internal teams, and make iterative decisions. The role shifts from being the source of answers to being the architect of decision-making systems. Systems that allow the organization to respond intelligently and quickly. If we step back, a pattern becomes clear. Strategy in 2026 is no longer about defining a fixed path. It is about building the capability to navigate changing paths. It is not about eliminating uncertainty. It is about operating effectively within it. And it is not about being right once. It is about learning continuously. So the question leaders should be asking is not what is our long-term strategy, but something far more critical. How resilient is our strategy when the assumptions we built it on inevitably change? Because they will. And when they do, the organizations that adapt fastest will define the market, not the ones with the most detailed plans.